The rain had stopped only moments before the carriages began to line the gravel path leading to Whitcomb Manor, and Earl Thorne Ainsbury stood beneath the stone archway as though the night itself waited for his permission to unfold. He had arrived earlier than most, not out of eagerness but out of habit. He disliked the bustle of arrivals, the forced courtesy of greetings, the noise that attempted to disguise the insecurities of the aristocracy. He preferred silence, controlled distance, the cold assurance of knowing that nothing and no one could intrude upon the fortress he had crafted around his heart. It had been 10 years since his father's death, yet he still carried the man's voice within him, sharp as the edge of a blade. Feel nothing, Thorne. It is the only way to remain unbroken. And so Thorne had lived according to that creed, erecting walls so high that even he forgot what lay behind them. He stood now in a manor overflowing with music, chandeliers, laughter, and yet he felt nothing, or tried to convince himself that he did not. But the moment he stepped into the ballroom, he sensed it, the faint, inexplicable shift in the air, like a memory brushing against his sleeve. He tried to ignore it, adjusting the cuffs of his dark evening coat, letting his cold grey eyes survey the room with the detached precision that had become his reputation. People turned to look at him, some with admiration, others with apprehension, for Earl Ainsbury was not a man easy to read, nor easy to approach. He carried the weight of his lineage in every gesture, and expectation clung to him like a shadow. Then he saw her, not instantly, not dramatically, not as the poets would describe the sudden spark of fate. It was quieter than that, almost tentative. She stood near the French doors, slightly turned away from the crowd, as though she remained undecided about whether to join the revelry or escape into the night. Her gown was a shade of midnight blue, simple yet striking, with no jewels adorning her neck, only the delicate rise and fall of her breath. Her hair, pinned loosely, carried an air of softness uncommon among the orchestrated perfection of the other ladies. Lady Evelina Mercer. He had met her once or twice in the endless circuits of London society, brief greetings, insignificant exchanges, but he had never bothered to commit her presence to memory. She had always seemed too quiet, too composed, too unwilling to push herself forward. Women in their world learned quickly that silence was a liability. The ones who thrived were those who mastered charm and invitation. But she, he remembered now, had said little during their first introduction, and even less during the second. And for reasons he had not examined at the time, he had not spoken to her again. Yet tonight, something in her stillness unsettled him. She did not seek attention, but attention found her anyway. A young gentleman approached her with the eagerness of someone newly confident in his station. She greeted him with a polite tilt of her head, a measured smile. Nothing improper, nothing overt. Still, Thorne felt a faint tightening in his chest, an irritation he refused to acknowledge. He looked away, forcing himself to greet Viscount Ravensbury with a controlled, neutral bow. "Thorne, you arrived before the crush. I would have wagered my estate that you'd appear fashionably late," Ravensbury laughed. "I came for the quiet," Thorne replied. A foolish hope, clearly. The Viscount chuckled, but Thorne barely heard him. His gaze had involuntarily returned to the woman near the doors. The gentleman speaking to her seemed overly enthusiastic, leaning closer than politeness required. Evelina stepped back, not harshly, not obviously, but enough for Thorne to notice the faint line of discomfort near her mouth. Why did he care? He lifted a glass of champagne from a passing servant, though he hardly tasted it. He was aware of Ravensbury speaking beside him, something about political alliances or the upcoming season, but Thorne's focus kept drifting to the corner of the ballroom. Evelina stood alone again, her gaze distant, fixed on something beyond the windows as though the gardens offered a refuge she dared not claim. He did not approach her. Of course he didn't. Earl Thorne Ainsbury never approached anyone without purpose, without calculation. And what reason could he possibly have to speak to a woman who had never shown the slightest interest in him? Still, his attention betrayed him. Every time he turned away, something drew him back, some subtle expression, some gentle movement. She carried herself with a quiet strength, one that contrasted sharply with the artifice surrounding them. And for the first time in years, he felt the faintest hint of curiosity disturb the still waters of his composure. The orchestra shifted into a waltz, and couples began to move toward the center of the floor. The room swelled with colors and motion. Thorn remained where he was, uninterested in dancing, uninterested in participating in a ritual he had long found tedious. But when he saw another gentleman approaching Evelina, this one older, more assertive, Thorn felt a pulse of something unfamiliar, something unwelcome. He set his glass down too abruptly. "You seem distracted," Ravensbury observed. "Hardly," Thorn replied, though the word came clipped. He watched as Evelina offered the gentleman a soft but firm shake of her head. The man insisted again, attempting to take her hand, and Thorn's jaw tightened. When she stepped back, her eyes lowered in discomfort. Something inside him snapped. A small, almost imperceptible crack, but powerful enough to propel him forward without conscious thought. He crossed the ballroom with steady, measured strides, his expression unchanged, but his pulse quickened by a force he could neither explain nor control. The gentleman turned just as Thorn approached, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Ainsbury," the man greeted. "I was just asking Lady Mercer if she would—" "The lady seems otherwise engaged," Thorn interrupted quietly, his voice firm yet not confrontational. "Perhaps another time." Evelina looked up at him then, and in that single moment, he understood why he had been unsettled from the moment he entered the room. Her eyes were not loud or pleading. They were steady, clear, and honest, and they revealed something he had not expected. She was not intimidated, not by him, not by the situation, not by the world that demanded women shrink themselves to survive. The gentleman bowed stiffly and retreated. Thorn remained in place, unsure what to say now that he had interfered in something that likely did not concern him. "Thank you, my lord," Evelina said softly, her voice calm but not delicate. "But I assure you, I was managing perfectly well." His pride pricked at her words, though her tone held no mockery. "Of course," he replied, lifting his chin slightly. "I merely noticed your discomfort." "No," she answered, looking directly at him. "You noticed something you thought needed to be corrected." Her words were gentle, but they landed with unexpected force. Thorn, who had commanded positions of authority and respect without difficulty, found himself unsettled. He opened his mouth to reply, but she added, "Still, I appreciate the intention." He had received gratitude many times, yet none had felt as disarming as hers. The orchestra swelled behind them. Couples, gliding elegantly across the floor, but they remained still, suspended as though the world had narrowed to the small distance between them. "You do not dance," she observed, not as a question but as a simple truth she had somehow perceived. "I find it unnecessary," Thorn said. Her lips curved in the faintest suggestion of amusement. "I imagine many things in your world are deemed unnecessary, my lord." He should have taken offense. Another man might have, yet he couldn't. There was no disrespect in her tone, only a quiet understanding, as though she knew precisely how much he held back from the world. Before he could form a response, she lowered her gaze politely. "If you will excuse me." She stepped around him, moving toward the edge of the ballroom, with the unhurried grace of someone who carried her own quiet universe. He watched her leave, irritation and intrigue warring within him. No woman had ever spoken to him that way. Calm, honest, unafraid, and certainly no woman had ever walked away from him without waiting for his dismissal. For the rest of the evening, he felt her presence as though she cast a shadow across his thoughts. Whenever she moved through the room, he sensed it without needing to look. Whenever she spoke with another guest, he felt an inexplicable tension ripple through his chest. And when she finally slipped out through the terrace doors to catch a breath of night air, he found himself turning toward her again, drawn by something he refused to name. He did not follow her. Pride held him in place, rigid and unyielding. He refused to be the kind of man who chased after something he did not understand. But long after she disappeared into the garden, long after the ballroom had swallowed him back into its gilded noise, he realized with slow, unwelcome clarity, Lady Evelina Mercer was the first person in years to make Earl Thorn Ainsbury feel anything at all, and he hated how much he noticed it. The morning after the Whitcomb ball dawned. With a grey, reluctant light, the kind that seemed to reflect Earl Thorn Ainsbury's own temperament, he sat alone in the library of Ainsbury Hall, a vast room lined with generations of leather-bound volumes that had belonged to men who, like him, had believed that emotion was best buried beneath duty. A fire burned low in the hearth, though the season was mild. He had grown accustomed to keeping flames alive even when unnecessary, as though the faint crackle offered some illusion of warmth that life itself refused to give. He had not slept well. His thoughts had wandered far too often to Lady Evelina Mercer, her steady gaze, her quiet composure, the way she had said you noticed something you thought needed to be corrected. It was absurd how her words lingered, echoing through him with an insistence he neither invited nor welcomed. He had met countless women, all of whom smiled too quickly or spoke too sweetly, hoping to be the one who softened the Earl's cold exterior. None had succeeded. None had remained memorable, but Evelina, without intention, without effort, had left an imprint on the night he could not ignore. He told himself it was irritation, not intrigue, annoyance, not interest. She had challenged him, subtly, gracefully, but undeniably, and he had spent years mastering the art of not being challenged. Thorn set aside the letter he had pretended to read. His gaze drifted to the rain-specked window, where the gardens stretched into a muted distance. Memories he usually kept buried began to rise unbidden. He saw not the present, but the ghost of a boy standing in this very library, trembling beneath the weight of a father's disappointment. You are too soft, Thorn, too easily moved. A man of your station cannot afford sensitivity. He had been 12. He had been caught defending a stable boy from being dismissed unfairly. Thorn had spoken passionately, pleading reason, fairness, but his father had silenced him with a single look and a lecture that had shaped him more brutally than any punishment. Feeling is a weakness. Weakness destroys legacy. You must be better, harder. So he had obeyed. He had hardened. He had learned to speak with restraint, to act with calculation, to bury impulse beneath a disciplined surface. But in doing so, he had buried much more: hope, gentleness, trust. And though he carried his title with dignity, the boy who once cared too deeply had been locked away somewhere inside, swallowed by a man who refused to be vulnerable again. Now, in the silence of the library, he felt a faint and unwelcome echo of that boy, the boy who once believed that sincerity mattered, that kindness could coexist with strength, and he resented the feeling because it was Evelina who had stirred it, however unintentionally. Later that afternoon, seeking distraction, Thorn rode into the village to attend a meeting with the local magistrates regarding the allocation of funds for the upcoming season. His role demanded precision and detachment, and he fulfilled it flawlessly, offering concise evaluations and polite but distant remarks. The men around him respected him, admired him even, though none dared claim they understood him. When the meeting concluded, he stepped outside and found himself face to face with Lady Evelina Mercer. She stood near the entrance of the village church, speaking with a group of women from the parish. Her expression was lighter now, touched by a warmth he had not seen at the ball. She listened intently to the older woman addressing her, nodding with empathy, not politeness. There was a sincerity in her presence that felt almost foreign to him, unforced, unguarded, gently luminous. He had intended to walk past her without acknowledgement. That was the sensible choice. But as she turned, her gaze caught his unexpectedly, and he paused, unsure why. "My lord," she greeted, her voice calm. "Lady Mercer." His reply was clipped, though not unkind. "Visiting the village?" She nodded. "I promised Mrs. Harroway I would help with preparations for the charity supper next month. She finds the organization overwhelming." Thorn found himself glancing, almost unconsciously, at Mrs. Harroway, a woman known for turning even the simplest task into a whirlwind of chaos. "You offered to help her voluntarily?" he asked. "Yes," Evelina said, with a hint of amusement. It seemed the compassionate thing to do. Compassion, a virtue he had once possessed, before life had carved it out of him. She said it with such simplicity that he felt the faint sting of recognition, a reminder of who he used to be. "The event is important to the village," he replied carefully. Her head tilted slightly, as though she sensed something in his tone he had not intended to reveal. But she did not press. She never pressed, he noticed. Unlike others, she did not pry or seek to dissect him with curiosity. He admired that, reluctantly. A breeze brushed past them, carrying a faint chill despite the season. Evelina gathered her shawl around her shoulders, not shivering but merely adjusting to the sudden cold. The movement was small, almost insignificant, yet Thorn's attention followed it involuntarily. He noticed things, details he normally ignored. It unsettled him. "Are you staying long in the countryside?" he asked, though he hated how the question felt almost personal. "Only a few weeks. My mother is visiting relatives, and I had no reason to remain in London." Her answer was straightforward, but something in her voice changed on the word London, a subtle tightening he would have missed had he not been observing her so closely. He wondered what memories she carried of the city, whether she, like him, found its constant demands exhausting. Before he could ask anything further, a carriage approached, its wheels crunching over the gravel. A figure stepped out. Lord Harrington, a man Thorn knew only through political circles. Harrington's smile widened as he spotted Evelina, and he strode toward her with all the confidence of someone accustomed to receiving the attention he desired. "Lady Mercer, what a delight to see you so unexpectedly." Evelina greeted him politely, but Thorn saw the subtle shift, the way her posture stiffened, the way her smile became thinner, more distant. Harrington launched into an animated recounting of some recent event in Mayfair, barely leaving room for her to respond. Thorn felt something tighten in his chest again, an old instinct stirring, though he knew this situation did not call for intervention. He had no claim over her, no right to feel anything, yet he did. When Harrington finally acknowledged Thorn, it was with a brief, dismissive nod. "Ainsbury, did not expect to see you here." Thorn returned the gesture with a cool stare. "I reside here, as you well know." "Ah, yes. Rustic life suits some men." The implication was clear, and Thorn's jaw moved almost imperceptibly. Harrington turned back to Evelina. "I was just about to invite Lady Mercer to dine at my estate this evening. I have guests of considerable importance arriving." Evelina's expression remained composed, but her hesitation was unmistakable. Thorn could see it, even if Harrington could not. A flicker of discomfort flashed through her gaze, the same he had noticed at the ball. She did not want to go. And again Thorn felt that quiet, unbidden impulse rise within him. "Lady Mercer has prior commitments," he said, before she could reply. Evelina's head turned sharply toward him. "I do?" she asked softly, not with annoyance but with a calm curiosity that unnerved him more than anger would have. Thorn had spoken too quickly, too instinctively. He had not thought the words through, and now they lingered between them like a misstep that could not be undone. Harrington arched a brow. "Indeed? Commitments of such importance they prevent her from attending a social engagement?" Thorn could not retreat now, not without making the moment more conspicuous. "Yes," he said, his voice even but laced with something unspoken. "She and I were to discuss arrangements for the charity supper." It was a lie. An elegant lie, but a lie nonetheless. Evelina's eyes held his, steady, unreadable. Then she turned to Harrington with a polite bow of her head. "Perhaps another time, my lord. I fear Earl Ainsbury is correct." Harrington looked between them, suspicion flickering in his gaze, but eventually he relented with a tight smile. "Very well. Another time." When he left, the silence that remained felt disconcertingly intimate. "You lied," Evelina said quietly. He folded his hands behind his back, controlling every breath. "I saw you wished to refuse. I merely provided an excuse. You could have let me refuse on my own." Her voice was not harsh, it carried no resentment, but it carried truth, and that was worse. "You struggled to decline," he said. "I struggled with politeness," she corrected softly, "not with my decision." Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching, and for a moment he felt exposed, as though she could see through the layers he hid behind. She was not impressed by him, not intimidated, not affected by the walls that protected him from the world. It was infuriating. It was compelling. "I apologize if my intervention was unwelcome," he said, his words carefully measured. "It was unnecessary," Evelina replied, though her expression softened slightly, "but not entirely unwelcome. It was the closest thing to praise anyone had given him in years, and it landed with more weight than he cared to admit." She turned then, preparing to leave, and he found himself speaking without intention. "Lady Mercer." She paused. If you ever find yourself in need of assistance, he hesitated, surprised by his own words. You may seek me out. Her eyes widened slightly, not in admiration, not in gratitude, but in contemplation, as though trying to understand why a man like him would offer such a thing. And for the first time, she looked almost uncertain. Thank you, she said quietly. He watched her walk away, her figure drifting into the soft grey light of the village street. Something inside him shifted, subtle, but irrevocable. For years he had believed himself immune to connection, untouched by the world, guarded against vulnerability. But Lady Evelina Mercer had stirred something deeper, something older, something he had long believed dormant. And though he did not yet admit it, even to himself, the truth had begun to take shape. He was no longer entirely in control. By the time the next social gathering of the season arrived, a formal garden soiree hosted at Harrington Lodge, Earl Thorne Ainsbury had convinced himself that whatever interest Lady Evelina Mercer had stirred in him was a passing distraction. He repeated the thought often enough that it began to sound almost believable. He was a man governed by duty, not sentiment, and certainly not by the whims of a quiet, sharp-eyed woman who seemed to see more than she spoke. Yet as his carriage approached the estate, he found his attention fixed not on the evening's political discussions or on the expected dignitaries, but on one unwelcome question that continued to surface no matter how he tried to suppress it. Would she be there? The moment he stepped onto the manicured gravel path, he knew the answer. The gardens swirled with soft lantern light, and among the early arrivals stood Evelina, her gown a shade of pale silver that caught the fading sunlight. Like dew on morning grass, she was speaking with a young gentleman Thorne did not recognize, tall, refined, with the unmistakable ease of a man accustomed to admiration. Their conversation seemed effortless, punctuated by Evelina's genuine laughter, a sound that felt entirely incompatible with the memory of her reserved composure at the ball. Thorne stopped walking without realizing it. A breath tightened in his chest, quiet but sharp, and he forced himself to continue forward, refusing to give meaning to the reaction. It was illogical, unjustified. She was free to speak with whomever she pleased. She owed him nothing, not her attention, not her deference, not her silence. And yet, seeing her laugh at another man's words felt like a thread pulling somewhere deep inside him, unraveling something he had thought long secured. Thorne, someone greeted, a distant cousin of Harrington's, but the Earl barely acknowledged the man as he passed. His gaze flickered back to Evelina. She did not notice him, or if she did not show it. That too struck him with a quiet, unwelcome force. He made his way toward a cluster of acquaintances, offering polite nods, but little more. Conversation flowed easily around him, yet he felt as though he stood apart from it, observing the movements of the evening through a veil he could not lift. His attention drifted again to Evelina's side of the garden, where the young gentleman, who introduced himself in nearby whispers as Mr. Lawrence Ashcombe, offered her a glass of wine. She accepted with a grateful smile. Thorne looked away sharply, jaw tightening. The murmurs of the soiree seemed distant, blurred by the rising pulse in his ears. He attempted to steady himself, summoning the composure his father had drilled into him. Feel nothing, Thorne. But the words felt hollow now, powerless in the presence of a woman who had, without intention, shaken the foundations of his restraint. When he finally turned back toward her, he found her. Glancing in his direction, her expression unreadable. It lasted only a heartbeat before she returned her attention politely to Ashcombe, yet the moment lodged itself in Thorne's mind with disquieting precision. Eventually, the host announced that the orchestra was prepared to begin an evening promenade through the illuminated garden paths. Guests paired themselves quickly, laughter and curiosity guiding them toward the lantern-lit walkways. Thorne remained where he stood, watching as Evelina stepped forward beside Ashcombe, their steps naturally in rhythm. Her hand rested lightly on the man's arm, and something about the gesture, innocent as it was, struck Thorne with a sudden, inexplicable force. The promenade moved slowly along the paths, weaving among rose bushes and trimmed hedges. Thorne followed at a distance, unable to look away. The sight of Ashcombe bending closer to her as he pointed out a section of night-blooming jasmine ignited something Thorn could not pretend was mere irritation. It was sharper, deeper, twisting in a place he had spent years keeping numb. When Evelina paused to admire a cluster of blossoms, Ashcombe leaned in again, speaking softly. She smiled, gentle, appreciative, not flirtatious, but meaningful enough to make Thorn's chest tighten. He knew that smile. He had seen it in the village, offered to a trembling parish woman who needed sympathy. It was not a smile given lightly, and it was not his. He told himself to walk away, to ignore the entire. Seemed to behave like the rational, controlled man he had built himself into. But control failed him in increments, first in the unevenness of his breath, then in the involuntary clench of his fists, then finally in the quiet, decisive moment when he stepped forward and joined the promenade behind them. He kept a respectful distance, yet close enough that he could hear fragments of their conversation. "I had no idea the jasmine bloomed so beautifully at night," Evelina said softly. "It is one of my favorite sights," Ashcombe replied. "The gardens here are enchanting after dusk." "They are," she agreed, her gaze drifting along the glowing pathway. "And you?" Ashcombe ventured, with a hopeful lightness. "Do you enjoy evenings such as this?" "Very much," she replied, "though I admit I find larger gatherings overwhelming." Ashcombe laughed lightly. "Then tonight must feel quite manageable. A gentler sort of company." Evelina smiled at the remark, and Thorn felt heat gather beneath his collar. The man was attentive, charming, perceptive in all the ways that made women feel seen. It was a skill Thorn had never cultivated, choosing instead the armor of formality. And now, for the first time, he sensed the consequences of that choice with uncomfortable clarity. A group of guests paused near a stone fountain, admiring the lantern reflections on the water. Ashcombe turned to Evelina, offering his hand with an inviting gesture as the music shifted to a soft, melodic tune. "Would you like to walk a little closer to the fountain?" Thorn did not hear her reply, only that she agreed enough for them to step forward together. The moonlight cast a silver sheen over her hair, lending her an unintentional radiance that drew the attention of several nearby guests. He could not endure it any longer. He took a step forward. "Lady Mercer," he said, his voice low but unmistakably firm. Evelina turned in surprise, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of him approaching. Ashcombe glanced at Thorn with polite confusion. "Earl Ainsbury," he greeted. "I was not aware you had joined the promenade." "I had not intended to," Thorn replied evenly, "but I find the evening unexpectedly engaging." The words felt foreign in his mouth, but there was no retreat now. Ashcombe smiled, unaware of the undercurrent pressing through the moment. "Indeed, the gardens are magnificent." "They are," Thorn agreed, though his eyes never left Evelina. An unspoken tension stretched thin between them. She held his gaze for a long moment, too long, before offering a soft, steady smile that held neither invitation nor rejection. It was merely acknowledgement, yet somehow that made it worse. "We were just admiring the fountain," she said gently. Thorn inclined his head. "May I join you?" He had never asked permission for anything in his life, not truly, and the request slipped out before he could stop it. Evelina blinked, startled by the softness beneath the words. Ashcombe, oblivious to the subtle shift, nodded graciously. "Of course." The three of them walked the last few steps to the fountain, though it felt as though the world had narrowed to only two. Thorn remained at Evelina's side, keeping his distance as propriety demanded, yet close enough that he could sense the delicate rise of her breath. Ashcombe gestured toward a cluster of glowing lanterns reflected on the water. "Beautiful, is it not?" "It is," Evelina said. Thorn's voice joined hers unintentionally. "Yes." She turned toward him slowly, her eyes searching his with quiet understanding, and something in his chest trembled, not painfully, but with an intensity he had forgotten belonged to living. Ashcombe continued speaking, but Thorn barely registered the words. His mind was occupied entirely with Evelina, the curve of her profile in lantern light, the faint crease that appeared between her brows whenever she pondered a question, the softness that lingered in her voice when she spoke of simple, genuine things. He was aware, too aware, of the way other men were starting to notice her, glances exchanged, whispers forming. She had entered the season with little attention, but already the tide had shifted. And Thorn, who had prided himself on indifference, found himself struck by a fear he had not known he was capable of feeling, the fear of losing something he did not yet possess. Eventually, Ashcombe excused himself to speak with a relative passing nearby. Evelina stood by the fountain, her hands lightly clasped before her, her gaze drifting over the shimmering water. The moment felt suspended, fragile. Thorn approached her, though the words he needed were difficult to summon. "Do you enjoy Mr. Ashcombe's company?" he asked quietly. She turned to him with thoughtful eyes. "He is kind, easy to speak with." The answer struck harder than he expected. His jaw tightened. "You smiled often." Her brow lifted in gentle surprise. "Should I not smile?" "That is not what I meant." "Then what?" "Did you mean, my lord?" He faltered, the force of her directness rattling the fragile defenses he clung to. She watched him with calm expectation, her expression free of vanity or coyness. She simply wanted an honest answer. He could not give one. "Nothing," he said at last, retreating behind familiar walls. "I merely observed the evening." Evelina studied him with a quiet, penetrating understanding that felt perilously close to seeing him, truly seeing him, beneath the layers. "You seem troubled," she murmured. "I am not troubled," he replied quickly. "Then you are unsettled." He inhaled sharply, but she did not look away. "Why would you assume that?" he asked. "Because you watch people as though you expect them to disappear," she said softly, "as if you're waiting for something to confirm your fears." "What fears?" he asked, though the question tasted like surrender. "That you care more than you admit," she replied. For a moment, the garden fell silent. The lanterns flickered. The night breeze passed over them like a breath held too long. He felt exposed, laid bare by a woman who had no intention of hurting him, yet pierced him precisely because of her sincerity. Before he could speak, Ashcombe returned, smiling broadly. "Lady Mercer, would you care to accompany me to the Rose Terrace? I believe the night is at its loveliest there." Evelina hesitated. Thorn waited, heart tight, breath strained, shame and longing twisting painfully inside him. "Yes," she said, "at last. I would like that." And she walked away beside Ashcombe, the lantern light catching in her hair as her silhouette faded into the glow of the garden. Thorn watched her go, standing alone by the fountain, the water whispering its quiet song. For the first time in years, the Earl felt jealousy, sharp, humiliating and impossibly alive, and he despised how powerless it made him. The rain returned 3 days after the Harrington soiree, falling in long, relentless sheets that cloaked Ainsbury Hall in a veil of grey. Earl Thorn Ainsbury stood at the window of his study, watching droplets slide down the glass like threads unraveling from a frayed tapestry. He preferred the rain, its predictability, its quiet authority, the way it demanded nothing from him. Yet on this day it offered no solace. His thoughts, despite his best efforts, were consumed entirely by Lady Evelina Mercer. He had not spoken to her since the garden promenade, and it was not for lack of opportunity. There, paths crossed briefly at a luncheon in the neighbouring estate, an event he would normally have avoided entirely, had he not suspected she might attend. She had been present, as poised as ever, speaking with a small group of ladies near the conservatory. When she noticed him entering the room, she had greeted him with a polite nod. Nothing more, nothing less. A gesture so neutral that it struck him like a quiet blade. He had expected, he did not know what exactly. Perhaps a glimmer of recognition, a spark of curiosity, the faint shift in her expression that might acknowledge the tension that had passed between them near the fountain. But she had remained serene, untouched by the turmoil she had so effortlessly ignited in him. Thorn clenched his jaw now, turning away from the window. He sank into the leather chair near the fireplace, though the fire did little to ease the unrest inside him. Silence filled the room, broken only by the steady drum of rain against the stone walls. He told himself that her behavior was appropriate. She owed him no attempt at closeness, but something in her distant composure unsettled him more deeply than outright rejection would have. She had walked away with Ashcombe. She had laughed with him. She had looked at him, Thorn remembered too clearly, with a softness she had never offered to the Earl. It made no sense that such things mattered, and yet they did. When a knock sounded at the door, Thorn straightened, summoning the detached reserve that had served him well throughout his adult life. "Enter." His steward stepped inside. "My lord, Lady Mercer is in the foyer. She requests a moment of your time." Thorn froze. He had not expected that. He muttered a quiet, controlled, "Send her in." Moments later, Evelina appeared in the doorway. Her cloak was damp from the rain, her hair slightly looser than usual, a few strands escaping and brushing her cheeks. Yet she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had haunted him since their first true conversation. "My lord," she said softly, "forgive the intrusion. I hope I do not disturb you." "You do not," he said, though his voice sounded sharper than intended. "Please come in." She stepped inside cautiously, as though sensing some invisible tension hanging between them. She removed her gloves slowly, folding them neatly. Her movements were always careful, deliberate, beautifully measured. "I received your message from the luncheon," she began, her voice steady, yet tinged with something he could not identify. "You asked to speak with me privately. I apologize for the delay. Circumstances prevented an earlier visit." Thorn stiffened. Yes, he had sent her a message, a simple request for a few minutes of conversation, a reasonable gesture, a necessary one, yet she had not responded for 2 days, and that delay had burned through him more deeply than he admitted to himself. "You were under no obligation to respond," he said coldly. "I merely wished to clarify something." She blinked, taken aback by his tone. "Clarify what, my lord?" He stood abruptly, walking toward the fireplace to conceal the sudden rush of emotion tightening his breath. "Your association with Mr. Ashcombe." It was out. The words breached the air before he could restrain them. Evelina inhaled slowly, her eyes widening just enough to reveal her surprise. "My association?" she repeated gently. "Your closeness," Thorn said, though the word sounded foolish the moment he uttered it. "At the soirée and during the promenade, it was noticeable." Evelina stared at him for a long moment, silent, assessing. "Mr. Ashcombe is a kind man," she said at last. "He speaks easily, and he listens without presumption. Many women would find his company pleasant." Thorn did not trust himself to speak. "But if I am to clarify something," she continued, her voice cooler now, "I must ask, why does my association with Mr. Ashcombe require explanation? Why does it concern you?" Thorn's jaw tightened. He had no answer he was willing to give. No answer that would not expose him. And exposure was a language he had never learned to speak. "I merely wish to ensure your reputation is not compromised," he said, grasping at the only excuse pride offered him. Evelina's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, a mix of disappointment and something sharper, something fragile. "My reputation is perfectly intact, my lord, and if it were not, I cannot imagine how my speaking with a gentleman outdoors could compromise it." "You were alone with him," Thorn insisted, though the words felt pitifully transparent. She folded her hands before her. "You were also there, my lord, observing us." His breath faltered. "You seemed troubled," she added quietly, "as though something about the situation about me displeased you." Thorn looked away. "You imagine too much." "I imagine only what your silence confirms," she replied. The fire cracked softly, filling the tense space between them. Rain continued. Its relentless descent outside, a dull echo of the storm building in Thorn's chest. "I do not care for Mr. Ashcombe," Thorn said abruptly, the confession almost slipping out in spite of him. "And I do not—" He stopped. He could not continue. "You do not what?" Evelina asked. He shook his head. "Nothing." Evelina looked at him then, not with hurt, not with rejection, but with something far more devastating. Understanding. She saw through him, past his defenses, straight into the place he had spent decades protecting. "Thorn," she said softly, for the first time using his name, and the sound of it nearly unmade him, "you push people away even when they try to come near. You build walls even when no one threatens you. I do not know what you fear, but you fear something." He stiffened. "I fear nothing." "Then tell me the truth." "I have nothing to tell." Her gaze darkened with quiet sadness. "Then there is nothing more to discuss." She reached for her gloves, preparing to leave, and something in him twisted painfully. He had driven her away, not with malice, but with the very pride he believed protected him. "Lady Mercer," he said, stepping forward. She paused. "I do not dislike your company." She turned her head slightly. That is a poor attempt at honesty. He flinched inwardly, though outwardly he remained stone. I am not accustomed to explaining myself. I know, she whispered, but explanations are how trust begins. Silence. She looked toward the doorway. I believe it may be best if we keep our distance for a time. The word struck him with a force he had not anticipated. That is unnecessary, he said quickly. It is necessary, she replied, until you decide whether speaking to me is something you want or something you regret. I do not regret it. Then why do you look at me as though you do? He had no answer. Shame crept through him, not loud, not dramatic, but seeping, insidious. His silence told her everything he had tried to hide. Evelina lowered, her gaze, her voice softening. I do not wish to be another battleground for the war you have with yourself, my lord. I deserve better than confusion. She left the room before he could stop her. Thorn stood frozen, breathing hard, as the echoes of her footsteps faded down the corridor. The door closed with a soft thud, a sound that felt like the end of something he had not fully understood until it slipped away. He pressed a hand against the edge of the desk, gripping it as though steadying himself against an unseen blow. Rain hammered against the windows, the wind rising in a mournful sweep. For all his pride, for all his restraint, for all his practiced indifference, the truth was unavoidable. He had pushed her away. He had wounded her, and he had done so because he was afraid of wanting more, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of being seen. And now, she was gone. He had broken something fragile, something precious, and he felt it as sharply as if that brokenness lay, scattered across the floor at his feet. When the steward returned moments later with a letter requiring attention, he found the Earl standing alone, shoulders tense, gaze distant, his voice barely audible when he spoke. Not now, Thorn murmured. Not now. For the first time in many years, Earl Thorn Ainsbury felt the weight of his own solitude, not as a shield, but as a wound. The days following Evelina's departure slipped into a kind of hollow quiet that Thorn had not known since the early CE, years after his father's death. Ainsbury Hall, already a place of long corridors and colder memories, felt impossibly vast without the faint possibility of her presence somewhere within it. He found himself listening for sounds he knew were not there. The gentle cadence of her voice, the light steps she took across the foyer, the soft rustle of her skirts when she turned to leave a room. Ghosts of things that had barely begun. She had not written. She had not visited. She had not even appeared in the predictable cycles of the region's social gatherings. It was not silence he experienced from her. It was absence. And absence, he discovered, was far more punishing. He sat often in the study where she had last stood, replaying her words until they carved themselves into him with cruel precision. I do not wish to be another battleground for the war you have with yourself. She had said it gently, but the gentleness had made the truth sharper. He had always assumed distance protected him. Now, he understood it only condemned him to a life of stunned isolation. When a letter finally came addressed to him, his breath caught, only to fall when he recognized the handwriting of Viscount Ravensbury. Business matters, political formalities, nothing that mattered. He returned the letter to the pile of unattended correspondence and left the room abruptly, as though fleeing his own foolish expectation. He told himself to stop thinking of her, but his mind betrayed him constantly. Every corner of the estate seemed to contain a memory he did not want, yet could not bear to lose. Even the gardens felt altered, haunted by the image of her moving quietly among the greenery. When a week passed without a hint of her presence, Thorn made the decision he told himself was rational. He would leave for London. There were matters requiring his attention, financial reviews, obligations tied to the season, parliamentary discussions that several peers had urged him to attend. But deep in the place, he admitted nothing. He knew he was running. Running from the echo of her. Running from the truth he had refused to speak. London greeted him with the same dull roar it always offered. Carriages rattling down wet cobblestone, voices merging into soft chaos. The smell of damp fog creeping through narrow alleys. But this time it did not invigorate him. The city felt heavier, darker, a labyrinth of noise without purpose. Thorn settled into his townhouse near Grosvenor Square, the walls darker, the furniture heavier, the silence more suffocating than even Ainsbury Hall. He attended the meetings he was expected to attend, offered the necessary opinions, sat through endless discussions, but his mind drifted, his composure strained, his patience thin in ways no one had ever witnessed. His friends noticed the change. They did not dare mention it. One evening, a storm swept through the city, winds howling against the balcony of his study. Thorn stood near the hearth, the flames casting shadows across his tense features. The sound of the storm reminded him of Evelina's last day at the hall, the rain on her cloak, the steady bravery in her voice. He poured himself a drink he didn't touch. He sat at his writing desk, staring at the blank page before him. He should not write to her. He had no right, no reason, no claim. But the words rose anyway, pushing against the restraint he had built his life upon. He dipped the pen in ink, breathing slowly, refusing to tremble. Lady Mercer, there. Are moments which... He stopped, swore under his breath, and set the pen down. He tried again. You asked why your association with Mr. Ashcombe concerned me. I did not answer. The truth. Another failure. He pressed his fingers against his temples, forcing himself to remain still. His chest felt tight, as though something inside him was clawing its way toward the surface. He tried a third time. Forgive my intrusion. I find myself wishing to amend what was broken between us, though I have yet to. Understand how I allowed it to break at all. You have a way of seeing things I did not intend to reveal. Perhaps that is what unsettles me most. Perhaps it is also what draws me most. He stared at the words until the ink began to dry, fragile and certain on the page. Then, before he could think further, he folded the letter, sealed it, addressed it. He even walked it to the entrance hall, where a footman stood ready to dispatch correspondence. But when he reached out to hand it over, he hesitated. His father's voice, cold, unforgiving, echoed through him again. Feeling is weakness. Weakness destroys legacy. The paralysis was immediate, old, deep, bone-rooted. He pulled the letter back. I will deliver it myself, he lied, dismissing the footman. The footman bowed and withdrew. Thorn stared at the sealed letter in his hand for a long time. Minutes, hours. He could not recall. The storm outside broke against the windows with relentless fury, but nothing felt as relentless as the war inside him. Eventually he placed the letter inside a drawer. He did not open it again. He did not burn it either. It simply remained there, unsent, unspoken, unfinished. The next day he stopped attending social events altogether. His friends left messages he did not answer. Ravensbury visited once, but Thorn instructed his butler to say he was unwell. The lie felt almost true. London's fog thickened, swallowing entire streets in grey. Thorn walked through it late at night, coat-soaked, boots heavy, trying to outrun thoughts he could not escape. Everywhere he looked, he saw echoes of Evelina, reflections of her grace in the passing silhouettes, whispers of her voice in the evening quiet, shadows of her presence lingering behind every polite conversation he overheard. One afternoon, he stopped beside the Serpentine in Hyde Park. The water lay calm under a pale sky. Something in the stillness broke him open. He remembered her words again. I deserve better than confusion. He exhaled. Slowly, longer than he meant to, his breath unsteady. He realized with growing dread that what he felt was not confusion. It was clarity. Unwanted, undeniable clarity. He cared. Not lightly, not fleetingly. Not in the way a man idly notices a beautiful face. He cared in the way a man fears losing something he did not know he needed. He cared in the way he had spent his whole life guarding against. He cared in a way that made him vulnerable, exposed, wounded, and it terrified him. The following evening, returning to Grosvenor Square, he found a small envelope waiting for him. No name, no crest, only a single line written in feminine hand across the front. For your consideration. Inside was an invitation, a formal dinner hosted by the Mercer family in London, a gathering of moderate size, socially appropriate. He sat down, reading the words 3 times. It meant one thing. Evelina would be there. He closed his eyes. He had 2 choices: return to the estate's safety and pretend none of this had happened, or face her and the truth he had tried so desperately to ignore. That night he did not sleep. He paced the length of his study while another storm gathered, lightning cracking through the sky like a warning. He confronted possibilities he had avoided his entire life. He confronted memories of his father's expectations. He confronted the weight of loneliness he had pretended was strength. And for the first time, he understood something simple and terrifying. If he did nothing, he would lose her forever. By dawn, a quiet resolve had settled in him. Not comfortable, not confident, but real. He knew what he needed to do. He needed to try. He needed to speak. He needed to make right what he had broken. He wrote her a new letter, shorter, simpler, and this time without hesitation. "Lady Mercer, if you are willing, I would like a moment of your time at the dinner. I will not keep you long. I merely wish to speak truthfully. Something I should have done before." Ainsbury, he sealed it. He sent it. He waited. The reply arrived that afternoon. "We may speak. E. Mercer." And though the words were brief, something in Thorne's chest loosened. Not relief, not joy, but possibility. A fragile, trembling possibility he did not deserve, yet could no longer flee from. The dinner was 2 days away. 2 days in which he vowed, quietly, privately, determinedly, that he would no longer be the man who hid behind pride. 2 days in which he prepared to say the words that frightened him most. 2 days until the moment that would decide whether he would reclaim what he had nearly destroyed, or lose her in a way none of his walls could protect him from. The evening of the Mercer dinner arrived draped in a London fog so thick it softened the edges of every lantern flame along the streets. Earl Thorne Ainsbury stepped out of his carriage with a steadiness he did not feel. His breath misted in the cold air as he surveyed the house, modest by aristocratic standards, but warm and elegantly lit from within. Laughter drifted from the windows, gentle, human, inviting, everything his own home had never been. He adjusted the cuffs of his coat, straightened his posture, and forced his heartbeat into something resembling composure. He had prepared a dozen things he wished to say to Evelina, but now, standing at the door, he felt every word crumble into dust. He had faced political battles, land disputes, and the death of the father who had shaped and wounded him. Yet nothing had ever demanded as much courage as what he was about to do now. Tell a woman the truth. A footman opened the door, and Thorne stepped into the foyer. Warmth enveloped him. Soft violin music floated from the next room. Guests mingled politely, a low hum of conversation filling the air. He moved through them with practiced formality, offering nods and greetings, though his mind remained fixed on one question. Where is she? He spotted Evelina's mother first, a gracious woman with thoughtful eyes speaking with a small group of ladies. When she noticed him, her expression shifted to polite surprise. "Earl Ainsbury," she said, offering a gentle curtsy. "We had not expected your presence." "I received Lady Mercer's kind reply," he answered. "I hope my arrival is not an intrusion." "Not at all," she said warmly. "You are welcome." But there was something subtle behind her tone, a hint of caution, of protectiveness. And he knew then, with sharp clarity, Evelina had confided in her mother about their last conversation, and perhaps about her hurt. Before he could dwell on it, Evelina entered the room. The moment she appeared, he felt it, an immediate shift in the air, as though the world had quietly narrowed around her. She wore a gown of deep green velvet, elegant but modest, her hair softly pinned with wisps framing her face. She moved with the same poised grace he remembered, but tonight there was a distance in her expression, a gentleness laced with steel. She greeted guests calmly, but she did not smile easily. And when her gaze finally fell on him, there was no spark of surprise, only a careful, measured awareness. She approached him slowly. He had rehearsed a dozen sentences. None survived. "My lord," she said softly, her voice perfectly composed. "Lady Mercer." A silence stretched between them, thin, fragile, trembling with everything he wanted to say and everything she no longer expected to hear. "You asked to speak with me," Evelina said. "We may do so now." He nodded once, grateful she offered him the chance, though he sensed that chance was narrow and closing fast. She led him into a smaller drawing room off the foyer, a quiet space lit by a single oil lamp. She closed the door gently behind them. For a moment neither spoke. The room felt too small, too intimate, too heavy with the unspoken. Thorne drew a careful breath. "Evelina, You need not apologize," she interrupted softly. Not if it costs you more than the apology is. Worth. He felt the words like a blade between the ribs. It costs me nothing, he said quietly. She looked at him with eyes that no longer held confusion or disappointment, but resignation. It costs you something, she corrected. Honesty always does. He swallowed hard. Then, allow me the cost. She waited. What emerged next was not part of his rehearsed script. It was simpler, rougher, but true. I was wrong, he said. About everything. About you. About myself. She stiffened slightly, but did not look away. I let pride dictate my actions, he continued, forcing the words through the tightness in his chest. I interfered when I should not have. I withdrew when I should have spoken. His voice faltered. I feared what I felt, and I took that fear out on you. A long silence followed. The rain outside whispered against the window pane. Evelina stepped toward the center of the room, clasping her hands lightly. Fear is not a sin, my lord, but hiding behind it wounds those who try. To reach you, he lowered his gaze. Yes, and Her breath trembled, though her voice stayed calm. I became someone I did not wish to be, chasing clarity that you refused to give. You deserved clarity, he said. You deserved far more. Her eyes softened, but only slightly. What I deserved was honesty, he exhaled. I know. She waited again, giving him space to continue. Thorn stopped pacing his thoughts. He looked her directly in the eyes, bearing himself in a way he had never dared before. Evelina, I care for you. He had to force the last 3 words out, as though dragging them from a locked chamber inside him. More than I intended. More than I wanted. More than I was prepared to face. Evelina inhaled sharply, but she did not speak. It terrified me, he admitted, voice cracking for the first time. Because when a man like me begins to feel, he loses control, and I have spent a lifetime holding myself together with control. Still, she stayed silent, but her eyes flickered with something. Pain, hope, caution. I pushed you away, he continued, because I believed it was safer, for both of us. But the truth is, I was only protecting myself. Evelina's voice, when it finally came, was soft but unyielding. And what is it you wish now? He took a breath that felt like stepping off a precipice. I wish, he hesitated, terrified of saying too much or too little. I wish to make amends, to earn your regard again, to prove that I can be better than the man you last saw. Her expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. It was not rejection, but it was not acceptance either. Thorn, she said gently, you cannot ask me to forget how you made me feel. I do not ask that, he replied quickly. Only that you permit me the chance to show you something different. Evelina looked away, turning slightly, as though the nearness of his sincerity unsettled her. I want to believe you, she whispered. I truly do. Then believe me. But words are fragile, she murmured. Too easily broken. Her voice trembled then, the first crack in her composure. I tried to understand you. I tried to see beyond your silence, but you would not let me. I am letting you now. She shook her head. Now is too late for certainty. Her words struck him, not harshly but honestly. He stepped closer, stopping only when he sensed she needed space. What must I do? He asked quietly. Tell me, and I will do it. Evelina turned to face him fully, her chin lifting with the quiet strength he had always admired. You must show me, not by speeches, not by regret, but by action. I will. Not once, she continued. Not for a week. Not only in moments of passion or guilt, but consistently, steadily, until I no longer question whether I matter to you. You do matter, he said immediately, too quickly. She closed her eyes at the intensity of his tone. Then let your actions prove it. I will, he whispered. Another silence settled, but this one felt different. Charged, dangerous, delicate. Evelina stepped back. We should return to the dinner. He wanted to protest, to extend the moment, to seize the fragile thread between them. But he knew pushing now would only undo the sincerity he had offered. Of course, he said. They walked back to the foyer in silence. Guests glanced their direction, curious but discreet. Evelina moved toward a circle of acquaintances, offering polite smiles. Thorn remained near the doorway, watching her with an ache in his chest that felt both new and unbearably familiar. He waited for his moment to continue showing her, not speaking but doing, and it came sooner than expected. During dinner, a distant cousin of the Mercer family made a pointed remark about Evelina being too reserved for her own good. Thorne saw her stiffen, subtle but unmistakable. Before she could respond, he spoke with practiced calm. "On the contrary," he said, his tone controlled yet firm, "Lady Evelina possesses more insight and strength than most of us manage to display." A hush fell over the table. The remark had not been emotional. It had not been dramatic. But for Thorne, a man notorious for cold detachment, it was enough to silence an entire room. Evelina did not look at him immediately. When she did, her eyes searched his face with a mixture of disbelief and something gentler. After dinner, he found another moment to approach her, carefully, respectfully. "Evelina," she held up a hand, not rudely, just protectively. "I heard your words. They were unexpected, but welcome. Perhaps, he repeated softly, accepting the fragile thread she offered. She turned then to speak with another guest. He did not pursue her. He did not demand more. He simply observed, offering her the space she needed while ensuring through subtle actions that she saw him trying. And she did see it. Later in the evening, when she retrieved her shawl from the antechamber, Thorne silently stepped forward to adjust the clasp she struggled with. His fingers brushed the velvet fabric, never touching her skin, but the nearness sent a shiver through him, one mirrored in her breath. She stepped back gently. "Thank you. Always," he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes widened slightly at the word, but she said nothing. When the evening finally drew to a close and guests prepared to depart, Evelina approached him. Not close, not intimate, but deliberately. "My lord," she said, "I will consider what you said tonight. But do not mistake consideration for surrender." He bowed his head. "I would not dare." She hesitated. "I want to believe you're capable of change. I will prove that I am. And if you fail..." He held her gaze, the weight of the promise settling into him like a vow. "Then I will lose the only thing that has mattered to me in years." Her breath caught, but she quickly looked away. She stepped toward the door, calling for her carriage. Before she left the room, she turned back, just once. "Good night, Thorne." His name in her voice shattered him in ways he never expected. "Good night, Evelina," he murmured. He watched her leave. He felt the distance, but he also felt something else. Something fragile and alive. A beginning. Yet as the door closed behind her and the cold London fog crept in along the floor, he sensed something tightening, something looming, unresolved, something that would soon test whether his promises held truth or whether everything he feared losing would be torn from him entirely. Storm was coming. He felt it in his bones, and Evelina would be at the center of it. The storm Thorne had sensed did not break with thunder. It arrived quietly, the way life's most devastating turns often do, softly, subtly, like a shift in the wind that one notices only when it is too late to prepare for it. 2 days after the Mercer dinner, word reached him that Evelina had departed London unexpectedly. No explanation, no farewell, no letter. Her mother had simply informed a few acquaintances that Evelina required time in the countryside, rest, reflection, a pause from society. Nothing more. Thorne heard the news in the hallway of his townhouse, where Ravensbury had come calling. The Viscount spoke casually, unaware he delivered a blow. "I imagine she wanted some peace. She has had much on her mind." Peace, distance, escape. Thorne felt something inside him collapse inward, quietly, like a structure weakening from its very foundation. He dismissed Ravensbury with strained politeness and retreated to the solitude of his study, where he stood motionless by the window for a long time, the fog drifting outside like a shroud. She had left. Because of him. Because he had changed too slowly. Because he had spoken too late. He sank into a chair, exhaling shakily for the first time in years. The pain was unyielding, sharp, humbling, merciless. It made him realize something unavoidable. If he did not go after her, he would lose her forever. And not through fate, not through circumstance, but through his own cowardice. Before dawn, he was already on the road. The journey was long, cold, and soaked in wind, but Thorn felt the hours blur into a single determination. He slept little, ate even less. Every mile carried him closer to what he feared, but also what he needed more than air. By the time the carriage reached the countryside estate, where Evelina had taken refuge, a modest property belonging to distant relatives, the late afternoon sun filtered through grey clouds, casting a muted golden glow across the fields. He stepped out onto the gravel, heart pounding in a way entirely foreign to him. Fear, true fear, had finally claimed him. A housemaid answered the door, startled by the sudden appearance of an Earl at her threshold. After some hesitation, she admitted him to the small foyer and hurried to summon Evelina. Thorn waited, unable to stand still. He paced the limited space, fingers flexing, breath uneven. He had never chased anyone in his life. No woman had ever put him in a position where pride had to be swallowed whole. But pride had already cost him too much. Finally, footsteps approached. He turned sharply as Evelina appeared at the end of the corridor. Dressed in a simple afternoon gown, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked pale, tired. Not ill, not fragile, but heartsore, in a way he recognized with painful clarity. She halted when she saw him. Surprise flickered through her eyes, followed by something softer, something she immediately tried to hide. "My lord," she said, her voice steady despite the faint tremor he detected beneath it. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed, his chest tight. "I came to speak with you. You should not have traveled this far." Her gaze lowered briefly. "I did not intend to receive visitors. You can refuse to speak with me," he said quietly. "But I will not leave until I have tried." Evelina looked down, clasping her hands gently, as though steadying herself. "Thorn, why did you come?" He stepped forward but stopped a respectful distance away. His next breath trembled, "Because the thought of losing you has become unbearable." Her eyes lifted to his, slowly, cautiously, and what he saw in them nearly broke him. Hurt, hope, fear, questions, and beneath it all, a quiet strength he had always admired. "Please," he said softly, "walk with me, just for a moment." She hesitated, then nodded. They stepped outside into the late afternoon air, walking toward the edge of the field, where a lone oak tree stood like an ancient sentinel. The wind brushed against them, stirring Evelina's loose strands of hair. For a long moment they said nothing. Finally, Evelina spoke. "You should not have come." "I know," he whispered. "But I came anyway." She exhaled slowly. "I left London because I needed clarity. I needed distance. Everything felt too heavy. I caused that weight." "You contributed to it," she admitted. "But some of it belonged to me as well." He shook his head. "Evelina, She turned toward him then, meeting his gaze with painful honesty. "Thorn, why does it matter to you? Truly? Why now?" His throat constricted. He had never been good with truth, but he had never needed truth more than at this moment. "Because," he began, voice low, "I have spent my life hiding behind walls built by a man who believed emotion was weakness, and I let those walls cost me kindness, cost me connection, cost me you." Evelina's breath caught, but she said nothing. Thorn took a trembling breath and continued. "When you walked away from me at Ainsbury Hall, I felt something I had not felt since childhood, a break inside me, a fracture. I realized how deeply I feared what you made me feel, not because you frightened me, but because what I felt for you frightened me." "What do you feel?" she whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a raw intensity. "I feel everything," he confessed, "and it terrifies me." A soft gasp escaped her lips. Thorn stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as though approaching something sacred. "I care for you, Evelina, deeply, quietly, more than I have ever cared for anyone. And that truth is frightening, because caring means I can lose you. And losing you," his voice faltered, breaking for the first time in years, "losing you is a pain I am not strong enough to endure." Her eyes glistened, but she stayed silent, waiting. "You asked me once what I feared," he said. "I told you I feared nothing. I lied. I fear myself, my silence, my coldness, my failure to show what you deserved to know." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. I fear the man I became, he whispered, and I fear the man I might become if I do not change. Evelina covered her mouth with her hand, breath trembling. Thorn drew even closer, his voice a broken prayer. But most of all, I fear a life in which your presence is only a memory. She let out a soft, painful sound, half sob, half breath. He took another step, now only inches away. I have spent years believing I was immune to feeling anything, but then you walked into a ballroom and I felt everything. You challenged me. You saw me when no one else cared to look. You spoke truths I did not want to hear, and you walked away when my pride hurt you. He paused, breath unsteady. And yet, even after all I did wrong, I still want to be the man who stands beside you. Evelina's tears fell freely now, her composure slipping like autumn leaves, shaken from a branch. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step back. "Evelina," he said softly, "look at me." She lifted her face, eyes shining with a mixture of pain and longing. "I cannot promise perfection," he whispered, "but I can promise truth. From this moment forward, no more walls, no more pride, only sincerity and a devotion I have kept buried for far too long." She inhaled shakily, her hand trembling. "Thorn," she whispered, the sound of his name like a fragile confession. He took her hand gently, so gently it felt as though he were holding the most delicate piece of his own heart. "If you tell me there is no hope, I will leave. I will walk away and never trouble your peace again. But if there is even a small chance, just a sliver, that I can earn your forgiveness, tell me now." The wind stilled. The world seemed to wait. Evelina's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "You hurt me. I know," he breathed. "You broke something. I will mend it. You frightened me," she whispered. "Not with cruelty, but with possibility, and with your silence." "I will speak," he vowed. "Always." Another long pause. Then, "And if I let you try," she whispered, "you must promise one thing. Anything. No more disappearing, no more hiding. If you feel something, pain, fear, affection, you must tell me." He lifted her hand to his lips, not with passion, but with reverence. "I swear it." Evelina closed her eyes, her tears falling onto his knuckles. Then, after a moment that felt like the turning of an entire lifetime, she whispered, "Then yes, Thorn, you may try." He exhaled, sharply, shakily, as though her words had resurrected something inside him long considered dead. But before he could speak again, she raised a hand to still him. "I am forgiving you," she said softly, "but I am not giving myself lightly. If you want me, you must show it. With patience, with gentleness, with consistency. I will show you every day," he promised. "And if you ever return to silence—" "I won't," he whispered, his voice trembling with conviction. "Not with you." She looked at him then, not as a woman examining a suitor, nor as a wounded heart judging an apology, but as someone seeing for the first time the quiet, broken sincerity of a man learning how to love. The wind swept past them gently. The world exhaled. And beneath the old oak tree, with the fading light bathing them in gold, Earl Thorn Ainsbury bowed his head over Evelina's hands and vowed silently, fiercely, to never again be the man who let pride destroy what his heart could no longer deny. She was the only person he had ever truly wanted, and he would spend a lifetime proving it.